Hi everyone, and welcome to Rev Up Your EdTech Roadmap to achieve digital on day one of learning. I'm Jill Hobson with IMS, and we are delighted to have you with us today for the webinar. I'll speak more about our speakers, our guest panelists today in just a few minutes. But as you can see on your screen, we have with us today Jeff Bradley, Raymond Lee, and Aaron Rister. As I said, I'm Jill Hobson. I'm a K-12 Institutional Program Manager with IMS Global, and today I have with me Kara Jenkins, Director of Marketing Communications. If you need anything during the webinar, please do use the Q&A to reach us with your questions, or if you need help with something, and one of us will get back with you. I'd like to begin by setting a little context for today's webinar. Our webinar series is related to IMS Global's K-12 Digital Learning Revolution program. And that program really exists because we understand that school districts have a lot of different applications in use in the district, and that you really need them to work together. Those systems may not yet be talking to each other kindly or working together easily. And so by getting involved in our Digital Learning Revolution program, we can help you evolve your ecosystem until all the systems are working together seamlessly. You can start now, and you'll be able to see change quickly and over time. So what's really required to get involved and to have this Digital Learning Revolution program? Well, number one, we need the IMS Global interoperability standards. We need them to be adopted by the marketplace so that you have choices about what products you want to use. And it's very important that you as a district know what standards you need and how you can include them in your RFPs and other procurement documentation to make sure that the suppliers you're working with provide exactly the kind of resources that you need, and that they'll work together easily and seamlessly. This kind of change is not one that you can do overnight. It is something that requires a strategy. It requires planning and processes. It requires that a district look at this within the scope of the entire strategic plan for a district. And it does include the need for people to become members of IMS and to help keep advancing this community of leadership in K-12 so that we can keep moving forward and making new things possible. We hope you will consider getting involved in the Digital Learning Revolution program. You don't have to be a member to get started. If you just reach out to us at imsglobal.org/K12-revolution, you can reach out and let us know you're interested. We'll contact you, we'll schedule a meeting, and we can help you start on some of those things we were talking about, like creating a shared vision for everyone of how you want to get there, and working with other districts and learning about IMS Global's Conformance Certified Product Directory. Our program is led by a large number of organizations. Institutions and state departments of education have come together with lots of experience to help tell us what really works. We have an ecosystem with 410 education products that are in many different categories, and we have lots of ways to help you decide what products will work for you. Please be sure to check out our certified product directory at imscert.org. The Digital Learning Revolution program is a 4-tiered program, and it begins with that commitment in making that first step towards deciding that you want things to work better, to work together. And then we move on to the other tiers, as you can see on the screen, including that foundational tier where what we're working on is exactly what our guest panelists are going to speak about today. And that is how to get all of your systems rostered with students, all of your content connected so that all students can start learning on their first day, whether that be at the beginning of the school year or any other time. So now I'd like to introduce to you our guest panelists for today. That includes Raymond Lee, Director, Data Warehouse for Fulton County Schools in Georgia, Jeff Bradley, Director of Learning Resources for Keller ISD, and Aaron Rister, Coordinator of Educational Technology for Keller as well. I'm going to give each person just a moment to introduce themselves and tell you a few things about their district. Let me begin by asking Jeff to begin.
Certainly. My name is Jeff Bradley. I'm our Director of Learning Resources here, as Jill referenced. In Keller ISD, we are a large, medium-sized school district north of Fort Worth in Texas. We have about 2,700 teachers, about a little over 35,000 students spread across 42 different high school or 42 different campuses in our district.
Aaron, would you like to go ahead and add anything?
My name is Aaron Rister. I'm the Coordinator of Educational Technology here in Keller ISD, and it's always a fun day at Keller ISD supporting all of our teachers and students.
Thanks, Aaron. And then let me ask Raymond Lee.
Hello, I'm Raymond Lee. I'm Director of Data Warehouse at Fulton County Schools. We're in the metro Atlanta area. We're a pretty large district. We've got 96,000 students, about 7,500 teachers and certified staff, 18 high schools, 19 middle schools, 59 elementary, 10 charter, and we are a charter district. So we are actually have some flexibility in terms of how we do things with the state and with the federal organizations. Very diverse. We have a very large distribution of ethnicities and races. We're also about 46% very reduced. And we have schools that have high mobility rates and low mobility rates. So we've got a little bit of everything that we're dealing with.
Thank you, Raymond. And so with that, I now want to give our panelists just a chance to get started, telling you more about how they made the journey towards digital on day one. We're going to begin with Jeff Bradley and Aaron Rister from Keller.
Well, thank you, Jill. It has been a journey for us, in all honesty, and really we made some huge strides this past year and getting the majority of our programs and vendors up and running day one, and our goal truly has been to have not just day one access for when our students come back. Our goal is to have day one access for when our teachers come back. So when you think about that, that's typically for us about 3 weeks before school starts when you look at new teachers coming back, because we want our new teachers to be able to begin to have their hands on the resources that they're going to be using and playing and doing stuff in the actual systems that they'll be using with their students throughout the year. Again, talked a little bit at the beginning about our district. We have 5 high schools, 4 traditional high schools, and 1 is an alternative high school for students who are a little more classified as at risk. And we also have a CTE center in our district. And Aaron's going to just kind of talk a little bit about where we've been.
Yeah, so over in our journey of this being ready on day one, we've obviously gone through a whole lot of different things with different adoptions and having different vendors. Everybody wants something different. Everybody wanted a file that had these columns. This one vendor wanted a file that has these columns. So we did multiple spreadsheets, multiple CSV files, trying to make that happen. A lot of times it didn't happen until we're 6 weeks into school. Sometimes even longer than that. So just dealing with everybody's different wants and needs really was a big struggle. So one of the big things of helping us get to that digital day one is obviously these standards with OneRoster and just standardizing on the information that we're able to send our vendors and publishers.
So for us, part of our protocol, whenever we go through an adoption or are looking at new resources, is we sit down and have some different standards that we as a district are asking that they incorporate with. And so when our coordinators are looking and our teachers and our adoption committees, even before we take particular vendors to the community, to the adoption committee, we sit down, we have this letter that we share out with our with the vendors that we're reviewing, and we want to make sure that they are open to or aligning with the standards that IMS has put in place, particularly with single sign. We want to make sure that we are using vendors that will allow us to be able to have a single sign-on experience for our students and our teachers. OneRoster is key to making that happen, and we also want to make sure that our vendors are ideally utilizing common cartridges or thin common cartridges and have adopted some of the LTI standards as well. For our, there it goes. So our process and everyone's process really relies very heavily on scheduling. Right now, our campuses are in that phase of beginning to look at scheduling for next year and really working in 2 years and outlining the next year's schedule while closing out this one. So we work closely with our administrators on those timelines to make sure that those schedules are built as soon as possible and names are populated as soon as possible. Those names change. We know they're going to change. We haven't even really officially begun hiring teachers for next year until I think we open that window next week after our transfers finish up. But we know that that changes, but we want to make sure that schedules are built and the names are in there in the system so that come the time in June when we close out this year, even before we leave for summer prior to 4th of July, we can be well along on the roadmap towards getting everything turned on for our users for next year. A key component in that for us is looking and making sure that we capture all of our courses. So this is just some math classes, but when you look and see here, there are classes that we have with over 1,000 students in them, and there are sections that have 0 in them. And so as we're going through and mapping components within our system, we want to make sure that we're mapping not just the sections that currently have 1,000 kids or 2 kids in them, but also making sure we're mapping the sections that have 0 in them, because it's 0 right now, but that might change tomorrow. So we want to make sure we're capturing every single component of it with things that are possible to be made for the semester start.
So and along those same lines, we've currently partnered with Encore to do our single sign-on page and our application portal. So they're able to take our data that our data team has worked together to put our OneRoster data in, and Encore is able to kind of parse that together and able to send to our the different SFAP sites, so that we're not having to manage those on a daily or nightly basis. So we're able to easily send to all our different publishers, HMH, McGraw-Hill, Pearson, Edgenuity, and a few others that we have set up in Encore. And so this next slide is just a picture of kind of what our students see, just kind of what they see when they log into their KCloud. So our goal is to have as many things single sign-on as possible, so that our students are logging in once. They click a button, able to go to their math textbook, or able to go to their science textbook, or able to go to some different resources that we have here at Keller ISD, and just able to access those easily, whether they're here in district or at home doing some homework or extra study practice.
And this really has enabled us to get things onboarded very, very quickly. We just had a call yesterday, a proactive call with a vendor that we just took. We adopted K8, a new science curriculum for the next 4 years. It's a new vendor that we haven't worked with as a district, and we called them up. We had conversations with them before, but now that it's gone to board and POs have all been processed and whatnot, we wanted to get a little more further along in that onboarding conversation, and just being able to say that we utilize OneRoster really helps expedite that conversation, making it really easy to help throw out any kinks that potentially are in play. Changing a system from before, which involved multiple spreadsheets, craziness, into a much more streamlined, easily accessible, it really has helped save us a tremendous amount of time. We want to also share, this has also allowed us not just to streamline things with regard to getting stuff up and running for various vendors. It's opened up the door for us to expand initiatives. This past year, we use, not trying to promote a product at all, but we use Edgenuity to help manage some of our online resources and our credit recovery components. And we had used a wide variety of providers for that in the past and switched just to one provider that could take the place of 3 or 4 or 5 different things that we're using before. So in this initial year, our plan was just to roll out original credit classes that we deliver electronically for our CTE and our foreign language classes, as well as our credit recovery system. But the reality of that has been so much more. We've been rolled out, and it has been able to expand to blended learning and homebound opportunities and intervention stuff, and the dropout prevention program that we have at 2 of our high school campuses, in addition to our alternative high school campus, and some more intensive immediate credit recovery times within 6 weeks instead of just credit recovery at the end of the semester. And so I say that because we had OneRoster, we had all of this stuff in place, it was easy for us to get students added into programs which weren't previously being served. Originally, we had a small scope of students that would have been served with our initial plan, but the reality, and as we went out throughout the year, was we were able to increase the amount of students that were served through that program probably 20-fold because of the simplicity of OneRoster and the ease of having everybody there, students already enrolled in the systems, being able to easily add new campuses, easily add new courses, new sections, etc. So with that, I'll hold off on questions. I think we'll hand it over. Are we handing it over to Raymond, or are we doing questions just for us first?
So, Kara, let me just check in with you. Did we have any questions for Aaron and Jeff?
We did have one question that came in during the presentation, so I'll go ahead and ask you to address this now. The question is, does OneRoster support all data requirements for all vendors, or is there data such as Guardian data that may need to be integrated outside OneRoster?
That's not something that we've had to deal with yet. My assumption is that you'll probably have to deal with it outside of OneRoster, because I don't think there's specific fields for Guardian information there. And each vendor may be a little bit different on how they handle that. I don't know if that's something that Jill and could speak more to, being on the IMS side.
Sure, and I'll just chime in and say that at this time, the OneRoster standard does not do anything to populate or identify guardians as part of the data transfer. However, one of the awesome things about being a member of IMS is that you have the opportunity to provide a lot of feedback on what's working and what's not. And always when we try to improve a standard and update it, we're listening very carefully to our end users, our K-12 districts like Fulton and Keller, to find out what it is we need to do. So with that, I think we might go ahead and turn it over to Raymond.
All right, thank you. Basically, I've talked to a lot of this stuff. Something that is kind of interesting is the city of Atlanta has its own school system, so we're actually physically bisected by the APS system. So it's 70 miles from one end of the district to the other. That just adds to a lot of our interest in how we have to do things. Why are we using OneRoster? Personalized learning has gotten some bad press, but we are very heavily involved in meeting our students where they are. The we spend a lot of time looking at student-specific weaknesses, and we also are looking at things like acceleration and advancement as students are ready. And as a result of that, we're using a lot of different software to enhance our classroom experience. Another thing that we're working on right now is our standards mastery framework, which is basically ensuring that students know what they're expected to know by standard and by specific skill. And so as we're seeing specific weaknesses in particular areas, that we can provide resources that will help that student meet their specific needs. And we're spending a lot of effort in those areas right now. And this list of software that I have up here is just the tip of the iceberg of what we're using. Keller kind of alluded to this already in terms of, the old way of having to get vendor specs and then write a package and develop your FTP processes and extracts. And then you go through this process of adjusting based on differences between how you interpret something versus how the vendor interprets things. And so that process can take weeks, and you have to repeat that for every vendor. And potentially, if they upgrade a new release and require a change of the spec, you get to start this process all over again. So it's very, very time consuming. With the new way, we're using ClassLink, similar to the way they're using Onboard, as our distribution point, and we just have to provision the vendor with ClassLink. Using that, they can get the data through an API, they can get the stuff through a CSV, they can get the things using 1.0 or 1.1, whatever they can do that. It's all just handled with a simple provisioning that we do in the beginning. And then you just have to go through the course association, which again, Keller alluded to. You test your extracts. Main thing we're looking for there are any kind of vendor weaknesses in their software that might bite us, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But we can literally stand up these products and have them ready for training in a couple of days. It's very, very, very quickly. To the point that somebody made earlier about additional information, we do run into that. And the OneRoster spec has extensions that you can use that allow you to pass specific fields. If it's just a few things, and then in some cases where there is totally different information, we will do a supplement, but that's still a whole lot easier than writing an entire interface. Most of it's already covered. So the big pain points that we're running into, there are vendor limitations. If the software is not geared to handle people that have multiple roles, if they don't accommodate multiple schools, some of them have got format limitations. And for instance, the class name, we try to give the same class name to all of our software so teachers recognize their classes. And with 96,000 students and 7,000 teachers, there's a whole lot of classes going on. So sometimes we have to address those vendor limitations, the big area being in roles. So if you've got a teacher who is also a grade level chair or an instructional coach, that instructional coach level may give them more of an administrator access, but if the particular package requires teacher access as the primary, there's times where we've had to take that OneRoster standard and manipulate the roles so that that particular vendor is getting a slightly different version of the roles. But it's still basically the same information. It's just a matter of tweaking that role. That's, again, a whole lot faster than developing a whole new interface, and it's a lot more stable. Again, something that Keller alluded to is the schedules have got to be right. That's been an issue with us, especially at the elementary level. Elementary schools used to think that if they had everybody in a homeroom, that was fine. But with things like acceleration, you might have a 5th grade student who's taking middle school math. So just having them in homeroom is not enough. You've got to have their math course scheduled as well as their ELA courses. So that's been a little bit of a learning curve for us in terms of getting people to understand that. And then it gets into that whole culture shift. You always have the the push and pull between pedagogy and technology. We've had situations where there was a tool that was just outstanding in terms of aligning to our Georgia milestones, which is our state assessment in terms of it being a predictor and assistance. And we've had to pick those tools even though the technology wasn't great. But in those situations, we still work hard with the vendor to make them understand we want OneRoster. And while they may not have it day one, they will at least work towards getting that. Information quality is real important. Where you're associating these courses, if they're using an obsolete course number or they're creating something that's not in the district course catalog, those kinds of issues will cause students not to show up. So you have to make sure that you've got high quality in that data. And then the thing that I can't emphasize more is the fact that IT has to have an extremely strong partnership with academics. You've got to be involved in the selection process and helping to write the RFPs and helping to evaluate the RFPs and understand what's coming and what they're planning, as well as IT telling academics what's coming and what's planning. That link with academics at Fulton is now extremely strong. And they understand why we need the standards now. And they're actually asking the vendors about OneRoster support and single sign-on support and all those types of things. And that's really been a huge shift from where we were 5 years ago. It used to be that, if we got invited to the table at an RFP, it was rare, and a lot of times we had software that was handed to us a week before school started. Oh, by the way, we need this stuff rostered. That doesn't happen anymore, and that's part of that culture shift. The other thing is getting the schools to understand that scheduling component, because we finally got them to the point now where if Johnny's not showing up in a particular software, they check to see that Johnny's scheduled in the appropriate class before they even call us with a problem, because 99% of the time, that's the issue. Johnny wasn't scheduled correctly. So it's important to make sure that the schools understand that when they're doing scheduling, especially in high mobility situations like we have. And in terms of getting the vendors on board, you have to be tough. You got to make sure that they understand that we expect it. And people love to be in meetings with me when I'm with vendors, because I'm brutally honest in terms of telling a lot of vendors that their software is technologically primitive. I don't mind telling them that. If they don't support OneRoster, if they don't support single sign-on, if they don't support nightly feeds, that software doesn't work for us. If they don't handle the multiple roles, it causes a lot of heartache. So we beat them up constantly about making their software do what we need to do, especially in terms of the OneRoster support. The other thing that I do is every time we run into an issue that OneRoster would have prevented, I beat them up about that. If we were using OneRoster, this wouldn't have happened. And then you have to work on that partnership with academics, so that if you've got a piece of software that the vendor's not doing, is not going to support OneRoster, then you just have to sunset it and look for other alternatives. And our academic department is now willing to do that. So that's a major plus. In terms of how you get started, my recommendation for that is, number one, talk to your current vendors. You'll probably be surprised how many of them already support OneRoster. That second thing, again, it's more than just talking to your academics department. It's a matter of really becoming a partner with them and getting them to be a partner with you. You should consider a provider partner like ClassLink or Onboard. There's others that are out there, because it does make things a lot simpler when you can just hand over that provisioning process. The setting expectation of the vendors, can't say enough there. And then, something that's really important is that you put the OneRoster in your RFP language. You've got to be able to get that that understanding up front. And I think vendors are becoming much, much more responsive to that. I think they've all seen the writing on the wall that they've got to get there. And even our worst case vendors, where they didn't support any kind of daily feed or anything else, are this year they're providing the daily feed and the single sign-on, and next year they're going to support OneRoster. And you'll see that kind of evolution if you really work with your vendors. And then, the third thing is talking to your schools and making sure they understand how to connect the dots in terms of how enrollment affects that day one readiness and being able to do things. And that's pretty much what I had. Any questions?
Thanks, Raymond. And I'll just check in with Kara to see if any questions had come in for Raymond.
No, Jill, we're all set on questions at this time.
All right. Well, we're going to move into a little bit of a Q&A with our panelists today, and I want to again encourage everyone who is with us, please feel free to submit your questions to the Q&A. We'd be glad to try to answer questions that you may have, as well as the questions that we want to ask from this side. So let me just start with the folks from Keller, Jeff and Aaron. Let me ask you, what kinds of conversations are you having with members of other departments, such as academics or curriculum and instruction, to help everybody get on the same page and understand the value of using OneRoster?
I would reiterate Raymond's statements about making sure that your C&I folks are on the same page. Our content coordinators are learning the benefit of it. They're beginning to become more familiar with the language of OneRoster and single sign-on and all those other components. For us, the big piece for us has been more so about now it has allowed us to get to a point that not only is the technological components in place on the tech side, but when we redesign curriculum every summer, when we go through curriculum rewrites, we have a team of teachers that does that, but we're also to a point now where we have a teacher within that team that specifically addresses the online components of some of our vendors that we utilize. We mentioned Edgenuity and credit recovery, but they've gotten to the point where they're not just thinking about the immediate classroom face-to-face, they're also thinking about how that affects our digital tools and the digital tools that they're able to utilize in their classrooms to better serve their students and themselves. So our content coordinators are using our virtual team members to help streamline their written curriculum and make sure that not only is the written curriculum adjustments made, but on the online components where those apply, there are adjustments being made there as well. It definitely doesn't work to have silos, I will say that. And if you currently have silos, it has helped us break down those silos that exist between different entities in the organization.
Thanks, Jeff. Raymond, did you want to add anything to that?
Just that silo, I'll tag on to that one. That breaking down those silos is critical not only to the implementation of OneRoster, but it's amazing how much more functional the district has become as we've broken down those silos. And that's a kind of a side effect that comes out of this process.
Let me ask the both of you to maybe address this. You have to some extent, but I'll give you a chance to maybe expand on some of your specific practical techniques. How are you working with vendors who haven't yet adopted OneRoster?
So I referenced the letter that we utilize in our adoption process, and that really is just a starter of the conversation. There are some content areas for us. A lot of our advanced academic courses, our AP classes, a lot of the vendors that support those products haven't come as far along in their adoption of OneRoster. At least that's been our findings. Whereas your more traditional K-12 classes have, or vendors that support traditional K-12 stuff have. And so for us, we haven't been able to draw an absolute firm line in the sand, and we're not going to do it. We're not going to use your product if you don't support OneRoster, but we certainly are pushing that direction. Having those conversations with the vendors, like Raymond said, pointing out the times where OneRoster would have made the process much more easier for them, and not just for us, but also for them, because it takes a lot of energy, time, and effort off of them as an organization, as well as off of our staff as an organization.
Raymond, anything to add?
I would just say that we have found that when you sit down and explain the benefits to most of the vendors, they're actually pretty quick to get on board. We've had several situations similar to Keller in terms of people that had not heard of OneRoster, didn't realize what was out there. And when we talk to them about the benefits of it and the fact that you don't have to create an additional feed, you don't have to go through that translation process, the iterative testing and things of that nature, that it does make their world much simpler. And most of the companies that we've talked to are receptive to at least looking into it, which is obviously the step of getting them to commit. And again, just really pushing on why it's advantageous to both of us. To Keller's point, it's also the IMS group has been very good in terms of if you they've got a lot of resources out there for vendors. They're willing to work with vendors to get the certification done and everything else. So there's a lot of resources to help them do that.
Thanks, Raymond. There is a question coming in from our audience. Let me ask you both to think about how you want to answer this. What would you say is the greatest benefit and the greatest challenge you are currently finding with OneRoster? Who wants to start?
I'll start it. The greatest benefit is the speed of implementation. The fact that you can stand up a new product in a couple of days, I think is pretty impressive. The greatest challenge is probably vendor limitations in terms of the roles, being able to support multiple roles, and that's not a limitation of OneRoster, that's actually limitations within the vendor products.
I would agree. The greatest benefit is definitely time, energy, time, effort saved on our side. A challenge is probably like when you come up with an adoption or whatnot, and you're looking at one product that does and one product that doesn't. And thankfully, we haven't had where instructionally this would be the best product, but it doesn't support OneRoster, because most of the time we found that when the products that do support OneRoster, instructionally they tend to be a little bit further ahead, has been our case, and also the online tools, the online resources development that those vendors have already put in tends to be a little bit further ahead than the others. So for us, thankfully, it's just kind of been that those entities those vendors have always risen to the top kind of naturally, because of some of the effects that OneRoster, the secondary effects that has within the vendor's organization of just helping overall have a better product.
both of you for answering. And so I want to transition as we get ready to wrap up today's session to telling you that there are a number of resources, and you've heard both of our folks mention that, both school districts mention that there are resources. Please be sure to check out our K-12 playbook, which you'll find at imsglobal.org/K-12. All of our members have worked together to share things that they've learned and resources for you to take advantage of. You can also see from this slide that we have numerous districts involved at IMS. We have over 60 K-12 members, including school districts and representation from state departments and suppliers as well. We want to encourage you to come to our next webinar in the series, which will take place in June. Watch for the registration information to come out shortly for that June 20th webinar. We also want to invite you to consider joining us for our Learning Impact Leadership Institute. This is a great way to learn more about the ways you can get involved in the K-12 program that was mentioned earlier. We have tracks for K-12 districts specifically, one that is focused on the technology ecosystem, and another one that is focused on how you can use the K-12 program to improve your instructional impact. There are some specific related resources that we want to point your attention to, and those include an overview of the Digital Learning Revolution program and OneRoster implementation FAQs, which both our folks from Keller and Fulton helped to put together. We think those resources will be of particular use to you as you think about moving forward in implementing OneRoster. So just a few action items for attendees. Again, check out those two particular resources in our K-12 playbook. Please consider scheduling a meeting with us to talk more about how the K-12 Revolution program can help your district move forward. And we want you to go back to today's webinar detail page, take a look at it tomorrow, and you should be able to gain access to all of the resources, including the presentation materials that have been shared, as well as a copy of the recording. And with that, we want to thank you very much for attending today's webinar. Have a great day.